Shalom Aleichem, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Shmoozing with Avi. We have a very special guest today. He and I share a little bit of our background. His name is Robert Wolf. He's an MD. He's actually a neuroradiologist who attended the University of Michigan Medical School, completed his training at Brown and Yale universities. He grew up in a suburb of Detroit. As the only child of Ervin and Judith Wolf, their stories of the escape from communist Hungary and his father's tragic history of escaping the Nazis twice, but losing his own parents, inspired Robert to document his parents' tales and share those stories with Jewish groups, history aficionados, and biography lovers throughout the United States, Europe, and elsewhere. In Not a Real Enemy, the name of the book, Robert shares his family saga and the forgotten history of the nearly 500,000 Hungarian Jews who were deported and killed during the Holocaust. Through an epic and inspiring tale of daring escapes, terrifying oppression, tragedy, and triumph. Sounds like a movie to me. So please welcome my guest for today's schmooze, Robert Wolf. Robert, you want to join me, please? So Robert and I met through a mutual friend, and I was very taken with the story. And as I said earlier, he and I share that our families come from Hungary, and my family, like his, were deported towards the end of the war and sent to Auschwitz, where most of my family was murdered. My father luckily survived. Robert, welcome.
Hi, Avi. Thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
Of course. So I always want to find out what makes a person who they are. And so tell me first, if you don't mind, a little bit about your background. So I understand your parents came from Europe, but you were born in the United States?
I was born in Detroit. And soon after, my parents moved to suburban Detroit, Mount Clemens. Actually, it's about 20 miles east of Detroit, and that's where I grew up from I don't know, 2-3 years old till I graduated high school.
Tell me a little bit about your family life when you were growing up.
I was very lucky. I mean, my parents were both very intelligent. They were very nurturing. They were very big into education. I showed an interest in music, so they sponsored having me take piano lessons for 8 years, which I really appreciate now because of my current music appreciation. I went to Hebrew school regularly. I was bar mitzvahed in Mount Clemens at 13 in 1975, October 4th, 1975, which is actually a special anniversary in the book. When I talk about it in my speeches, when I do talks. High school, I was a salutatorian in my high school. I studied hard, just about all A's, and lucky I had great friends to help me along, great colleagues. I played a lot of sports. I lettered 9 times in sports, and I was active. My friend and I wrote a sports column in high school that actually had that won an award in the state of Michigan. We were second doubles in the state of. We were actually all state at our senior year at second doubles in tennis in Michigan. So I was also a swimmer, golfer, soccer player. And we played all the sports anyway, too. So I'm still friends with a lot of those people from my hometown. And I'm getting wonderful support about the book and the story. It started with my hometown, but really everywhere now. But it's been a great support system. So, and then I went off to Tufts University and went on my pre-med and medical career at the University of Michigan, like you said. And then I was lucky enough to be at Framingham Union Hospital for a year for my internship, Brown University for my radiology residency, and Yale for my neuroradiology residency, which you covered. And I'm lucky. I'm very privileged. I'm grateful. And then all of a sudden, I'm 30 years old, and now I have to, after all that indentured servantry, now it's time to make a living. So part of the reason I didn't really do much with this book until I will tell you the history about the book when you're ready. But
I'm still, first of all, you're going to have to tell us about October 4th, because needless to say, you've now set it up. But what you didn't mention was the Jewish essence of your upbringing. Were there many Jews in your neighborhood in suburban Detroit? Did you grow up in a Jewish neighborhood? You said you went to a Hebrew school. Did your parents speak Yiddish at home? Did they speak Hebrew, Hungarian? What was the essence of your Jewishness when you were growing up? How much was it a part of your life?
Such great questions. You just bring back this big flurry of memories. So, okay, so to delve into more details, my parents were conservative. My mom was more so than my dad, because my dad was an OBGYN, ended up delivering about 10,000 babies in a shortened career in suburban Detroit. So that's called redemption after all we read, and we see how this turns out, that it's complete redemption. Hebrew school, most of the Jewish community in the Detroit area was on the west side of Detroit, Southfield, Oak Park, West Bloomfield, Birmingham. I lived in Mount Clemens, and then we're in Macomb County. There were only about 100 Jewish families at the time in the Macomb County, and there's only one synagogue at the time, and that was in my hometown. It was within walking distance. It was an Orthodox temple that was built in 1909. I have the stained glass window, or one of them, that was preserved when they raised that building to make room for a new one. Ironically, also in 1975, I was one of the last bar mitzvahs at that Orthodox temple, and I was trained to do my bar mitzvah under an Orthodox rabbi and a Morah. And we had Hebrew school taught by very religious people. The Morah was from Israel, and we had a cantor, Tadelbaum, I remember, excellent voice, great guy. He used to play dodgeball with us after Hebrew school classes. So it was fun. It wasn't just work. We had laughs. We learned things. My parents didn't speak Hebrew or Yiddish in the house, but they spoke Hungarian often, especially when they had secrets they didn't want to tell me. I think part of it was they wanted to forget their often dark past of Hungary, although they were always faithful and loyal, patriotic to Hungary and the United States and Israel throughout their lives, in spite of Hungary's very, very poor times in the 20th century. So the Hungarian was their secret language, and they never taught me Hungarian because I think they wanted to sort of let that past go with me being a first generation American. So it was a combination of both. I did pick up on a lot of Hungarian phrases and words over the years. When I went to Israel last year, it was surprising how much Hebrew came back, but I was never really fluent in either. Most of my friends were Christian, but I did have a lot of Jewish friends, and I still do through, thank God for social media. I mean, you hear a lot of bad things about social media, but in this case, it's great for spreading the word about my book and the message, and having support from my friends and other people that I'm meeting, daily. So I was one of 100 families. Our neighborhood actually had quite a few Jewish families. So the epicenter of the Jewish community in Mount Clemens was sort of in our neighborhood and the 3 or 4 blocks around us. So my parents were very well respected in the Jewish community. They were respected in the general community and the medical community as well. And I was lucky to be a part.
Were there any other Holocaust survivors?
That's a great question too. Most of my parents' friends were American-born in my county and in my temple, with the exception of a few of the elderly people. But I couldn't really tell you the history of all of them because I was such a young kid, and you didn't really ask back then. Truthfully, I mean, I didn't really start asking questions about it until later in life. So, but on the other side of Detroit, on the west side, yes, my parents did have quite a few Holocaust survivor friends. Aggie Rubin comes to mind. Rest in peace. She passed away, and she wrote a memoir about the Holocaust that was also co-authored, like my book was. So they were very, very good friends. Her husband, Zoltan Rubin, just passed recently. He was 103 years young when he just passed away about a year or two ago. So they had a lot of Jewish friends and Christian friends and Muslim and Hindu and African American friends. But yeah, they were very much affiliated with the Jewish community, both in our neighborhood and elsewhere. And they stayed in touch with a lot of Jewish friends in Chicago, in other parts of Michigan, New York, Florida, probably just about every state in the country. My dad had friends in Africa, India, you name it. They were very, very cultured people. They loved history. They loved to study. They loved education. They loved the arts, the sciences, museums, the opera, the theater, and they shared it with a lot of people and met friends and educated friends through that. And they educated a lot of people about their history and the Holocaust, especially my mom.
Well, that was going to be my next question, because you said something very interesting. You said that they didn't really talk about their Holocaust experience. When do you remember, when you were growing up, when do you remember learning about the Holocaust, and how did you find out more? And when did you find out your parents' stories?
Well, it was really quite I was so busy, went between high school, college, medical school, residency. I was so busy that I really didn't have time to pursue it. And I wasn't home that much either. And my mom really didn't talk about it with me that much my first 30, 35 years of life. But she did definitely talk about it with her friends and family and internationally too, by the way. I haven't even mentioned European family, and we could talk about that too. But yeah, my mom frequently, she might have some minor PTSD with it all, but I think that was her resolution of it, was discussing it with other people, whereas some survivors aren't able to do that. They just, so the same with a lot of Vietnam vets, and I understand that. My parents were so happy and so grateful to be free that you would never know what happened to them by their demeanor. But my dad, not so much. He was in the hospital a lot. He delivered a lot of babies, did a lot of surgery, but he did tell me his stories. I remember his very first escape. That really stuck with me, throughout my life. And I did end up reading his book at one point, maybe when I was 30, 35, 40. I didn't really think much of it at the time. Maybe I didn't finish the whole book. Maybe I didn't read it so carefully. But we could talk about the history of the book later if you'd like. But later on, when I
think this is a good time to
talk
into that.
Okay,
so you were in your 30s when you really started to find out more in depth about your parents' experience, and specifically your father's story. How did that come about?
That's very true. And I was proud to be Jewish, and I definitely defended the Jewish heritage and name, but I really, even then, I was sort of indifferent until probably 5 years ago when I got the zap, when I actually read my dad's story thoroughly and realized these stories are so amazing. They're just so unbelievable, so fascinating, so miraculous that I decided to share it. So we'll go back to the 1970s again. So after my parents finally settled in the Michigan area and then built a house, and my dad's practice was established, my mom and dad actually wrote his autobiography on paper and pencil, to typewriter, to computer. They wrote the stories as though they'd happened the day before. They were very, very articulate people. They knew the English language as well as anybody, even though they had heavy accents. And they described the stories as though they'd happened the previous day. And the book is it's a history book. It's history light about Hungary. It ranges from World War I to the end of the Hungarian Revolution, like you said, in 1956, when they finally escaped. After that, enough was enough. But from typewriter to a computer, flash forward 1997, my dad passes away, unfortunately. Flash forward, and my dad, by the way, wouldn't have lived in 74, which is how old he was when he died, if they'd stayed in Hungary. He had mitral valve stenosis, and he had coronary artery disease, and Hungary would not have been able to treat him like the Cleveland Clinic did twice. He had 2 open heart surgeries. So I think moving to the United States, well, it could have bought him a year, but it bought him, I'd say, at least 14 more years of life because of that move. So needless to say, after all of that, he died in 1997. Then flash forward to 2016, my mom passed away. A historian friend in the neighborhood handed me the disc. Now my dad's story's on a disc. And I didn't think much of it then because I was so busy taking care of my mom's affairs. She wasn't Queen Elizabeth or anything, but there was a lot to take care of, including, I want to mention, she was very proud of this Hungarian and German restitution fund for Holocaust survivors. And she was getting a monthly stipend or biannual stipend, whatever it was. And that was hard to close out, believe me. And it wasn't a lot of money, but she was very proud to be able to establish that and have those 2 countries acknowledge all the malfeasance. So we took care of that, and that took about a year. And then I decided to take a year off. I actually retired from radiology, and I just kind of retired from the world for a year, did a little traveling. And then a friend of mine in Michigan asked me to help him out with some x-rays and some ultrasounds from home out of Michigan. And by then I was already living in Massachusetts. So I complied. I started reading, and that brought me to the disc, and I loaded the disc of my dad's story into the computer. And between cases, I started reading this time, the entire book and word by word. And it was very emotional to me. And I thought, wow, like you said, this could be a movie. I mean, and it's not even just that. It's just sharing my dad's stories and understanding from the first 10 pages that the background of anti-Semitism is really in this book. And it's really not hard to figure out. And how my dad negotiated through it and had to work around it. So now we're in 2018. I finally converted the autobiography to a biography. That took me about a year. And then I moved down to Florida, and we had about 20 edits later. including introduction to my awesome fellow author, Janice Harper, who's a Christian lady, but also she got her PhD at Michigan State, so she's got a Michigan connection. She's out of Washington State, but she loved the story. And she said, we're going to make the story something special. So she took about a year and change to work on the story. And instead of just dad was born on and dad did this and dad did that, she switched the order around of the events. She parallel stories, converging stories, conversations, letters to and from home. But the bottom line is it was all based on what my dad said. So it's still a biography. I mean, there's nothing, she didn't change much of anything. A couple of people might have had unknown names, so she had to make up a name or two, but the rest of the story was all true. But she really turned it into a special novel, a special book. So, and so now here we are, 2023. The book was, we picked up Amsterdam Publishers, a wonderful publishing company. This is all they do. So if you're interested in reading about other people's Holocaust and World War II stories and related Judaica stories, Amsterdam Publishers is one to look at. They're putting out about 3 books a month, which is amazing. And they're a small publishing company that not a lot of people have heard of, but they're the biggest ones in the Netherlands. So Liesbeth Hink, this was literally a bottom of the ninth inning shoestring catch, because Janice also, she put together the proposal package for me, the query letters, and she vetted out who to query, the realistic agents and publishers that would take on the project. Literally, Amsterdam Publishers was the last one. It was May of 2022. We were just about to self-publish, and Liesbeth picked us up from Amsterdam Publishers. And then we published in October of last year, and here we are about 4 or 5 months later, and working hard at it. We're trying to get the word spread about my dad's amazing stories, part 1, and the miracles, but also how wrong anti-Semitism is. And we can talk more about that, of course. I'm sure you can ask.
Well, and that's a perfect segue into the next question, which is tell us the story. Yes, anti-Semitism is on the rise again. I never thought in our lifetimes that we would see the kind of overt anti-Semitism that seems to be blossoming all over, not only the United States, but all over the world, even back in Hungary. So tell us about your father's story, what you discovered in his autobiography and now the biography. And you still owe us an explanation of October 4th.
All right, October. All right, we'll start with October 4th, because that's kind of how the book starts out. October 4th, 1943 is when my dad was conscripted into the forced labor camp, as was his best friend, Frank. And that was recently corroborated by Frank's daughter, Susie in LA, who actually sent me a couple of chapters of her dad's story, which was part of a different biography, sort of a family biography. Frank didn't reveal as many details as my dad did, but he sure corroborated a lot of what my dad said, including the day that they were conscripted into forced labor camp out of Győr, Hungary, which is a small town in northwest Hungary, industrial town that my dad grew up in. And his friend Frank became friends forever. His friend Frank escaped twice from forced labor camp with him. I don't want to say too many details. The first one is the one I remember all my life, and I can't say the most exciting because they're all pretty exciting, but it's the one that sticks with me the most. And so they escaped together for the first time, and then they got sort of corralled and into the dog pound in Budapest after weeks on the run, and double crossed, and then they escaped again from headquarters that was right near Nazi headquarters in Budapest. They just ran out the door and got on a trolley. And the luck on these guys with that escape, the timing was perfect, and the luck was amazing, and the strategy was there. Both very smart men. And so by now you get that anti-Semitism in the background. We can backtrack to his forced labor camp, where they were beaten, urinated on while they're digging trenches, marching here and there in the heat of the summer, in the dead of winter, doing meaningless tasks just to keep them at work, punishing them in the most unusual ways, hanging them by fingers or hands on trucks and other things like that. It's just so depressing how people come up with new ways to torture other people over the years. They still, even back then, there's just so many different ways that what people do to persecute other people. So early on, so it starts off with my dad being conscripted into labor camps, shoved into trains, shoved in with the other guys, worked and lived in stables on the ground, just totally squalid conditions. So And then their escapes, of course, were harrowing because anybody who would catch them would either turn them in or kill them instantly. And they managed to avoid all that. So, and then finally, after that second escape, my dad was really quite a bit on the run for months before the war finally ended. And the war for him ended, of course, in Hungary, the war ended at different times, different parts of the country. So he was in the Budapest area at the time, but in Győr, his hometown, he couldn't go back for a while. Finally, he got to go back to find out what happened to his parents. And of course, there was no internet, no TV, no radio, no newspapers, no word of the outside world or the war. They would get bits and pieces of rumors, but for the most part, they were isolated. And so then, and of course, the Jewish people were. My dad was made to learn that Jewish people were supposedly inferior as a kid, not only as a kid, but under the communist regime. And obviously, the communists took over. If the U.S. had taken over for Hungary, then it might be a different story. They may never have come to the United States. I could have been grown up a Hungarian citizen, and that might have been a free country, and the whole makeup of that part of Europe could have been completely different. So complete serendipity. As it turns out, the Russians were no better to the Jews, short of slaughtering them en masse. But believe me, they arrested and tortured and jailed and murdered plenty, as you know. So, and my dad and mom discussed their triumphs and tragedies there. And my dad got to go back to med school. Of course, Jews were not allowed to go to, he got kicked out of high school. He got kicked off his high school swim team back in the day for being Jewish. A friend of his even said, "Boy, Ervin, you're such a great guy. It's just too bad you're Jewish." And he didn't mean that in a condescending way. He just meant it as bad luck, because that's the way the rules are right now. So they go back because of so many murders in the war. They needed more. Hungary needed more doctors, so they invited more people to return to medical school. My dad was a bright guy, and it was a 10% quota for Jewish people. So he was lucky to be, with the help of the JDC, I should add too, the American JDC helped my dad go back to school. So became an OBGYN, and that was tough for him because he still wasn't free. He felt like he was under the communist rule, and some of the doctors became communist turncoats and spies and people that you couldn't trust. And so my dad became conflicted between practicing medicine and being free sometimes. So his third escape attempt, I don't want to say too much, but he kind of changed his mind. He was in fear of reprisal from the Soviets. It might have hurt his chances to practice medicine the rest of his life. So he went back. By now he was this was back when he was a med student still, but he went back, and nobody even knew he was gone. He was on call the next night, and he made it to Austria. He argued with an armed Russian soldier. The stories he made up were unbelievable, and so went back. And then my mom and dad finally couldn't stand it anymore. And then the pinnacle of their thoughts occurred during the Hungarian Revolution in '56. Mom and dad were frontliners. Dad was an OBGYN, and now he had to double down as a trauma surgeon for 2 or 3 weeks. 3,000 people were killed in that war, and countless injured, and countless refugees and homeless. But Dad, so he was doubling down, exhausted, I'm sure, between delivering babies and doing regular surgeries, and also taking care of wounded youngsters surgically. So he was a trauma surgeon now. And my mom ran the blood bank. So Mom was in med school at the time. That's how they met, and they got married. That's another chapter, a great chapter, their secret Jewish wedding. And that's all I'm going to say about that one, because that chapter is so unbelievable. That chapter really reveals about the Russian communist menace. And I'd say nothing has changed now, as with this war in Ukraine, which I call the Hungarian Revolution on steroids, because it's just not ending. Of course, times are different now. The weapons are more sophisticated. The stakes are much higher for intervention by the U.S. and other countries, as we all know, and they have the duty to protect our country as well. So, because people did ask the question, why didn't the U.S. intervene in the Hungarian Revolution in '56? Well, it would take them forever to get the equipment over, let alone the men. And they were hiding behind the nuclear medicine back then, or the nuclear menace back then. And so it was a difficult decision for the U.S. And of course, the word of mouth, the word to get to the U.S., it takes a while. It wasn't just the first bomb goes off and it's viral on the internet nowadays, but back then not so much. So it was very cautious. It was very cautious to tread that path for the U.S. And so I kind of understand why they didn't intervene. If that war would have continued on, maybe they would have in the end. But my parents made their own decision after that war. They said no, thank you. So, and then after they escaped, my mom's parents, by the way, got a divorce. To protect the family, just to protect the family name. So because of the war, World War II, My mom's grandpa Harry ended up in London and ultimately California, and actually in between Providence, where he met them when they first moved to the United States. My mom's mother got remarried to Grandpa Bertzi, Albert Lieberman, who they ended up in Israel. He was earlier on a consulate to Hungary through Israel. So he was a mucky muck himself for a while. Ultimately had a factory in Ramat Gan outside of Tel Aviv, but still a very respected man. Met my parents in Vienna when they escaped. Sort of the end of the story, part one. I mean, there's more to it with my dad's mom's trip to the U.S., but that might be another time. We'll get through all this first. But the grandfather, my grandfather, who I met, Grandpa Bertzi, they wanted them to go to Israel after the Hungarian Revolution. Israel was in the Sinai War at the time, and my parents were like, two wars is enough. We don't need a third war. And so they decided in the United States as well, much to the chagrin of my mom's mother and very loved father-in-law, by the way. So
this sounds like a fascinating story. Why did you name it Not a Real Enemy?
Well, I have a different definition of why the book is titled that than my co-author Janice. But when it comes to literature, Janice is a lot smarter than me. So I'll give you sort of the hybrid answer. She thinks it's because the Russians and the Russians didn't really think he was an enemy of the communists, because he never protested. He was sort of they thought he was communist neutral, if I can use that term. He just cared about practicing medicine, whereas most of his colleagues bought into the Communist Party. Now, maybe some of that was just for survival. I'm sure a lot of it was. Some of it might have been bribery or whatever the case may have been, threats. But my mom and dad never bought into it. So in the end, escaping, and two smart people, potential doctors. By the way, my mom was 13 months away from graduating med school when they escaped in 56 and never got to go back, unfortunately. But that said, they had had enough. So my dad, the night before their escape from the country, his risk tolerance at this point was so high that he just snuck into the hospital, snuck into the medical staff office, a Jewish doctor, between security guards, looked up his dossier, and found the communists describe him as not a real enemy. But in the end, he wasn't a real enemy to the Jews or Hungary, but he was a real enemy to the Nazis and the communists, because he outwitted them throughout this period. He outwitted them, he outsmarted them, and he hated them. And so did my mom. They didn't want to put up with so they figured risking their lives, escaping was worth the risk. It was a well thought out, calculated risk. But that's exactly how the communists and in their almighty glory, or however you want to put it, in their lack of humility, they thought, well, he's not a real enemy because he's not a rabble rouser. All he does is practice medicine. And so that's how they described him on his dossier. He checked it out, make sure there was no bounty on his head. And so if they tried to escape and they were caught and arrested, they wouldn't have anything on him. And he had a clean record, and he was very proud and pleased with that. But in the end, he was a real enemy. And a few readers have written that in their reviews, that in the end, my dad was a real enemy to the Communist Party and the Nazis. So it's a very paradoxical title, but it's a very catchy title. And the true story of a Hungarian Jewish man's fight for freedom, part 2, really describes what went on with my dad. So my original title was The Hungarian Papillon, the Hungarian Butterfly, after the Papillon. We all know the Steve McQueen movie, those of us that are 50 and older, but fantastic story, Devil's Island, multiple escapes, maybe a little bit more daring than my dad's, different circumstances, obviously, out in the middle of the ocean. But my co-author advised that we should bring up a title that would be just as catchy, but that more people would understand the meaning of. So she thought the younger generation wouldn't. And I'd really like to sell the book to the younger generation too. I mean, people 50 and older are an easier group to pitch the book to, because they might have Holocaust survivors. They might have people that are still alive that are Holocaust survivors. And it doesn't even have to be that. It's just people that might read more, have time to read. You get the gist of it. But that doesn't mean my target audience isn't just people 50 and older, because ultimately I'd like the book to be taught in the classrooms, history classes, Judaica classes, museums, libraries. It's a lot of work.
That, of course, is the great challenge. How do we, with all these amazing stories that are out there, yours and so many others, how do we get to the next generation? How do we get to the non-Jews? let's talk for a moment about, how do we fight anti-Semitism today? How can we bring stories like yours to an audience that is used to 3-minute or 30-second sound bites? How do you bring it to them in a visual format? Because very few people, unfortunately, there aren't that many people reading as much as they used to, certainly not physical paper books, Kindle, whatever. Where can people buy your book, and how can people get your book? And what are your plans to use this book to reach younger audiences and fight anti-Semitism?
Well, I'm going to go back to what you said at the very beginning of our talk, is that you said this could be a movie, and I think I mentioned that too. And all I can say about that is from your mouth to God's ears, because if this book is ever found and a screenplay written and a movie actually developed, and enough people, if it gets enough good reviews, that would be a great source of media. That'd be a media that would really help spread the word. In the meantime, the book is available at Amazon online. You can get it at Amazon. You can look it up under Not a Real Enemy, the true story of a Hungarian Jewish man's fight for freedom. It's also at Barnes & Noble and at Walmart. And I'm proud to say it's on the shelves at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. And I get a little bit of PR help, and we're trying to get some books on the shelves, working very fervently at that. It is on the shelves at the Manhattan Beach, California, Barnes & Noble, which is a great start near the LA area. So, but we're working on that. I was invited to do a talk at my hometown library recently, and I'm very pleased with that. Hopefully that happens in September. And I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of support with that talk. And I will start by saying, well, the book will end up in that library, hopefully others. My publisher's trying to make the book more available to libraries. It's mostly print on demand now, but we're working on that so that bookstores can buy the book too. Ultimately, I'm going to Massachusetts, Rhode Island next month. I'm going to do a little day trip to Tufts, my alma mater, drop a copy off at the bookstore because I think they have a program of Tufts alumni writing books. Drop one off at the library, the bookstore, and the history department, hopefully. So I understand that there's a Holocaust and genocide and Judaica studies major. I just met somebody, I think it was on LinkedIn. She's traveling in Poland now, but she's a Tufts student now. She's starting this new major. But there's no department, there's no actual building. So I can't really, but she knows about the book. And so hopefully she'll help spread the word when she gets back to the United States, when she gets back to the Boston area. So that's a start. University of Michigan Alumni Association, I've reached out to them. I haven't reached out to Brown or Yale yet, but those are 4 schools in the area. And believe me, we're going to hit all of them. I mean, they're taking Anne Frank's diary and the Bible off the shelves in Texas, but I have a connection in Texas trying to get me to do a talk at the Dallas Holocaust Museum and maybe San Antonio as well. So, and she's a 1994 Rwandan refugee. So she's seen her share of genocide. So she loves what I'm doing. She's all in on that. So there's Texas. I've got a connection in Colorado who talks about the Holocaust. She's in her 80s, so I better call her again and see if I can get, because I'm actually going to Arizona. Arizona is a potential place to talk. I've got connections in Arizona, my home state of Michigan. I've done 15 TV interviews and counting. This is maybe my 5th or 6th podcast, hopefully a lot more coming. I've done 3 or 4 local talks. And it's not just the Jewish people that are catching interest with this. In Southern Florida, as you know, there are a lot of Jewish people, and believe me, I want them all to know about the book. But yes, the Christian people we need their support, of course, too. But my Christian friends and Christian companions and people that I meet daily through online or wherever, they're all in. The ones that are actually interested in finding out about the book, they're in. They're supporting it. So whether they read it or not is difficult. But once they read it, they're saying, wow, you've got to read this book. And they're sharing it, they're gifting it. And like I said, ultimately, I want to taught in the classroom, whether it's high school or college. And I've got a potential invite to talk to 8th graders in Davis, in Michigan, where I lived for a while. But I haven't heard back from them. And 8th grade, it's a little young for me, I think, for the subject matter, but maybe not. I mean, maybe Anne Frank's diary, but on the other hand, the book's an adventure. So it might be something that, but if the movie comes out and it's PG-13 and these kids get to see it and they say, wow, this is what they did to the Jews. Wow, this guy was pretty cool. Wow, he escaped again and again, or he got in here, he hid here, and his friend too. So it's all of the above. I mean, there's no one avenue to try to get the word across, but we sure are trying.
So that actually brings up an interesting question as we start to reach the conclusion of this schmooze. The idea of rising anti-Semitism. I mean, here we are in 2023. I'm telling my stories, you're telling your stories. We have many, many people out there trying to tell their stories. And yet, we are seeing this enormous rise. According to the ADL, anti-Semitic, incidents are 55% of all hate incidents in the United States, in the thousands of incidents. We're only 2.4% of the US population, 0.25% of the world population. Why do you think we're seeing this enormous rise in anti-Semitic fervor again? Here, especially here.
Well, lack of education, I think, is part of it. I mean, it might have started with COVID. I mean, there are angry people. Anger and power, as you see in the book, are a very, very bad combination. Now, fortunately, most of these people don't have power. They might have knives and guns and militia, but bring it. I mean, I've got words. I've got educate. We're going to educate people. Fortunately, it's a small minority of people still. Most people, I don't want to say are normal, but they think like, let's preserve life. Let's appreciate what we have in this country. Let's appreciate what we have in the free world and not what goes on in the dark world. Jewish people, like many Christians I know, Hindu, Muslim. I'm a doctor. My dad was a doctor. His dad was a dentist. His dad was killed. They used to do pro bono work. My dad did pro bono work. We all contributed to society. If somebody wants to have a conversation with me about it, let's get it out there. Let's get it on the table. Unfortunately, there's going to be people whose minds will never change, but we need to keep the laws reasonable. We need to keep our rights reasonable. Talk to our local governments. And that's the thing about the book, too, is that these people, it always ends badly for these, not only for the victims, but the people, the perpetrators. It just ends badly. And people need to realize that. When people see what my dad's story is, they'll say, wow, that could happen to me. That could be me. It could be my brother. It could be my uncle. It could be a bad neighbor. It could be a bad business deal, a bad community, a bad local government, a bad federal government, or a bad foreign government. It doesn't matter. It's one bad person. So no, we're fighting that off on my watch. If you want to fight me, I'll fight you, but I'm going to talk to you until you do something that's worse, until you commit that heinous crime. But I'm not using, like my dad, I'm not using knives and guns. I'm not using fisticuffs. I don't need to. Let's talk. Let's say, why do you think you're better than me? Why do you think you're better than an African American person, for example, or an Asian person? And a lot of Jewish people feel that they're the scapegoats for anger, for hate. 9/11, unfortunately, was the Muslims, and that was an ignorant time too. It's most of the Muslims are peaceful. Most of the people, they're peace-loving, religious, whatever it is. There's very few people that have that kind of hate. And then after, of course, the COVID, it was the Asian population that was targeted. And now that that's simmered down a little bit, somebody always needs to have a scapegoat. And
now it's the LGBTQ community. And
there's that too. So yeah, people need to learn accountability. People need to learn to, take care of their own lives, take care of their brethren, realize the value of brotherhood, take care of their neighbors, go to work, raise your family, educate your family. Not everybody has to read my book, but I just want to help. And the other authors like me want to help make people realize that things can go sour, and they can go sour against you too. So it's not just me or you, it's anybody. So,
but I think you hit it on the head. It's all about education. If we could figure out a way to mandate Holocaust and genocide and hatred education, if we could teach kids from a very young age, starting in kindergarten, that they have to accept those who they are with, the Black kids and the Spanish kids and the LGBT community, the Jewish kids, the Muslim kids, doesn't matter what color, what creed, what religion. If they could be taught that from a very early age, then maybe it could counteract whatever they're getting at home, where they're being told, that Jews are bad, Muslims are bad, gay people are bad, etc. I want to finish with actually an interesting thing that came up while we were talking for me, that I want to ask you, because you apparently are an expert in neuroradiology, right? That's your field. So, I was not surprised to learn many, many years ago that there is a genetic component to trauma. In other words, people like our parents, and many others who have been through any kind of trauma, you've got your PTSD, but apparently there is also a genetic element that kind of gets handed down from generation to generation. And I certainly feel that in my life, that there is definitely something in me that I've inherited from my parents' traumatic experiences in the Holocaust. But what I'd like to ask you is, in your studies and in your research and in the work you've done, have you ever found a neuroradiology component to trauma and to the experiences perhaps of Holocaust survivors? Did it change their brains?
Well, not specifically. Functional MRI is kind of it's still in vogue. It's in evolution. Not in my time. It was mostly anatomy and pathology. PTSD, of course, I think it's more psychological than necessarily. It could be genetic. I'm not sure, since I'm not really a psychiatrist, but I guess I don't really know the answer to that. I suppose in theory, people might be more predisposed to PTSD. I know if I went through what my dad went through, I probably would have, and I end up in this country with the way this country is going, I might have had a little more PTSD than my parents ever did. You would never know it with them. And, I'm not afraid to fight that. I'm not afraid to fight the PTSD, forget it. I mean, I've had my minor bouts of it, whether it's a bad relationship or a bad day, in the wards, or a bad day at work or something like that. But it pales in comparison to what my parents and their friends and family went through. So I don't know the answer to that, really. It's not a neuroradiology problem per se, but I imagine that if there's a genetic predisposition someday, if not already, maybe there's certain tracks to, maybe there's a tractography that's connected to that. Maybe there's a certain chemical imbalance, but not really sure. I think environment is just as important as genetics all across the board, and especially those that are being educated to hate the Jews and hate other races. There's no doubt that there's more environmental influence than genetic. I would think. I mean, that's just a
right. And I've encountered many times in my life and my travels that I actually met a Polish university student many years ago, and he I don't even think he meant to be an anti-Semite, but he kind of was, because he was brought up with these anti-Semitic beliefs. He was taught from a young age that the Jews killed Jesus and, that they needed to be punished. And even though he was a university student, relatively educated, he still maintained some of those kind of tropes. And he finally said to me, he said, listen, anti-Semitism was given to me with my mother's milk. And I thought, wow, what an interesting way to put that you're right. The environmental elements are, needless to say, extensive. When you grow up in an environment that hates Jews or gays or blacks or whatever, or Muslims, etc., it becomes a part of you, and then you have to kind of fight to against it. And again, education becomes a large part of it. But I am fascinated by the genetic elements of it. I feel that there is definitely a damaged component to, and in some it's more than in others. I know some children of Holocaust survivors that have very serious emotional issues. And I know some children of Holocaust survivors who don't. But everyone has some element of damage, which I guess could be genetic, could be environmental. But I am very curious to find out someday if there is an actual physical brain component that becomes part of that experience and that could be given down from generation to generation. Robert, I'm always fascinated by these stories, and I'm very grateful to have you. I'm very grateful to our mutual friend, Eddie Schultz, for introducing us. Is there anything else you want to tell the audience before we conclude?
I do, actually. It's funny you mentioned, because I saw you posted, I kind of reviewed your Facebook profile real quick before this interview, and I saw you were rejoicing Kanye's apology. And that's the kind of guy that goes a long way. Now
I think I was being a little bit facetious.
No, I know, but the kid they let back in the NBA, that kid that played, I mean, I liked him. He was a Boston Celtic, and he said, and I'm really disappointed to hear from the African American people, because my mom always used to say that that we need to stick together. We need to stick together. But to me, I'm tired of hearing us people, you people, those people, their people. It's we are people. You know, we're all people. In the politics, they call it across the aisle or both sides of the aisle. Listen. Let's get it together. We're all in the same aisle. We're all in the same church here, or we're all in the same synagogue. And so Kanye, these perpetrators, the people that are caught, need to be educated for sure. I think that's a great point. That and this somehow he changed his mind. He was taught that through whether it was a TV show or a book he might have read, or he was disciplined and forced to read or to see movies or to be educated about whatever they're doing wrong. Here in Florida, you heard about the kids in Weston defacing the grave sites, the gravestones. So those kids are caught. They were under 18, and they probably would just get probation. But those kids should be in the classroom having to read books like mine and others. And there are books about Holocaust survivors' kids with PTSD too. There's no doubt, and it's probably worth a read or two. Mine's different in its own way. It's got a lot of adventure. It's going to attract people because of the stories, but in the end, it's like, wow, that could be me. So, yeah. Oh, and by the way, ultimately, the book directly changes the mind of some people. If I can get that, it's kind of a long shot, but I've had that. I've had 3, 4, 5 people already told me, you have really completely changed the way I think about the Jewish people, and that really makes my day. And in some ways, myself too, because I didn't know everything they went through, and then it really makes me appreciate my freedom of religion and my freedom of speech here. Whereas before I really read the book and redid it, I had no appreciation. So I think people that read that book will get a real feel for what equality should be and what unfair is, and certainly what the dark world is about. We don't need a Russia, China, North Korea, Iran on our hands, and let's not let it come to that. We just don't need that.
We the people.
We the people. So not a real enemy. Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Spread the word. That's the big thing too. It's not just me.
You have your own website. What is your website? If people
my website is robertjwolfmd.com, and there's a lot of there's videos in it, my TV interviews, podcasts. There's some great photos. There's a lot of great content in it. Direct link to buy the book off of Amazon. You can email me at robertjwolfmd.com if you'd like, if you want to discuss this more. As I get closer, I tend to give my phone number away. I'm happy to sign a copy of the book, especially for local people, but I'll mail signed copies. I'll do it as long as I can until I get writer's cramp that disables me, or whatever else that I can't do it. I continue to do it as long as I can. And that's the point too. People need to spread the word about the book, the movie, whatever it is, and say, this, you got to see this. You got to learn about this, and it might help you change your mind, or at least get on the same team. So.
Right. While we're spreading the word, just FYI, I started a petition on change.org called the Acceptance Initiative. And the idea is to petition President Biden to mandate acceptance education in all 50 states, from kindergarten through 12th grade and beyond. So you can go to change.org and look up the Acceptance Initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, very proud to have Robert J. Wolf, MD, as my guest today. Go to robertjwolf.com to find out more about him and the book, Not a Real Enemy. Yes, Robert?
Oh, sorry, robertjwolfmd.com. Or you?
Oh, sorry, robertjwolfmd.com. I wish you much success in all your endeavors. And as you know, anything we can do to help, we are always here to help support these stories, because the more we can get the word out, to offset the Kanye Wests of the world, the more we can humanize our experiences, and the more we can bring our stories to the entire world and say, look, we are the people, and we all suffer, and we all have families. We are all mothers and fathers and sisters, brothers, aunts and uncles, and all of us bleed the same blood, and it's the same red color. So
I want to thank you for having me so much, and it's a very important subject. And I want to thank you also for all that you do. Your philanthropic work is outstanding. in Southern Florida. Robert Kraft is doing something. Robert Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots, is now trying to build a fund against anti-Semitism. And I've been told, try to reach out to that gladly. But I want to appreciate what because you've done quite a bit in this area, and you're nonstop. You're staying with it. And on top of your acting and your fine acting and your shows, your performances, God bless you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Robert. Maybe we can work together to get to Kraft and others like him.
Sounds wonderful. Sounds like a great plan.
All right. Thank you all for watching Schmoozing with Avi with Robert J. Wolf, MD. And go to our website, whyilovejewish.org, to find out more about all of our activities. We are constantly producing, presenting, and bringing the best of Jewish culture to the world. And we are now actively fighting anti-Semitism with arts and through the arts. So thank you so much for joining us, and see you next time on Schmoozing with Avi.